Well, hi, folks. Thank you so much for coming out today. For those of you I don't know, my name is Bridget Carey. I'm the program director here at the Guild, and this is the first of our Lecture on the Lawn series. So thank you so much for coming out. I know we're indoors today. I appreciate it on a cool Memorial Day weekend. Yeah, we're really excited to have you all here. Before we get to the talk with our craftspeople, got a few practical announcements. If you need a restroom, they're available through our gallery. If you exit this building, to your left, you'll see the paved stone pathway into a white building. That's the gallery, which is open today until 5 and every weekend now through October. So please come out. I hope you can see and see some of the wares that our craftspeople have made. We have lots of other exciting events coming up this year. Our next lecture on the lawn is June 14th. It's two local musicians, Kurt and Manny Nearing Bliss. They set classic poetry to original music. It's really beautiful, wonderful show that they put on. So I hope you can come out to that. We also have a mushroom dyeing workshop. We have a new pottery workshop we've just added, and our annual craft weekend is this August. So there's some flyers for each of those out on the food porch. Please help yourself and take one. I hope you can see it. This series is brought to us thanks to a grant from the Rochester Area Community Foundation, as well as the New York State Council on the Arts, who is supporting our programming. So we're really grateful for that, as well as all of our individual contributors who help support the Guild. And without further ado, I think that's all my real announcements. But we can hand it over to our craftspeople. I mean, I've been really interested in this question of what is folk art since I first came here. You know, we are called the Rochester Folk Art Guild. And what do we mean by that? And it's a surprisingly big question that there's a lot of art historians and art thinkers who talk about it, but it's also something that's so real to our lives, and a lot of choices gone into it. Even more than just the question of what is folk art, or what goes into this work that we're making, what goes into these pieces that we are calling folk art. And I found that that's one of the also more interesting things to me, that every piece that we see in the gallery, each thing that we've made here, tells a lot about our life that we are living together, about this area, about the different hands that have actually touched the pieces. So I hope we can hear a little bit about that today from each of our craftspeople, about their work and about folk art. And we'll start off with David Barnett. It's your workshop. David, thank you so much.
I was threatening to do stand up, and maybe I should stand up for a while. That'll be the stand up portion. This gave me an opportunity to delve into the woodshop library, which is surprisingly rich. And I found a catalog that I hadn't looked at for a long time. It was the hand-wrought object, 1776 to 1976. And it was a show curated in 76 in Ithaca at the Johnson Museum. And there are guild pieces in clothing and iron and furniture. And I could pass this around or have it available for people to see. It's quite a nice exhibit. There's a lot of New York craftspeople represented, and it was an honor to be in it. So I mused about this question about folk art that Bridget proposed, and I know that our founder, Louise March, chose the name Rochester Folk Art Guild, and I'm going to risk supposing what some of her thoughts were. It is a challenge and probably inadvisable to try to guess what she was thinking. But she did indicate various times what folk art meant to her and meant to the society at large. And some of the aspects were that pieces made by craftspeople, be they vessels, be they clothing, be they furniture, were objects for daily use. They were meant to serve. And so service is a very high ideal, so that a piece be in utility and has a functional quality, and ideally also has beauty and aesthetic value that makes it a joy to use. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, we don't have to yell at me. So usefulness and service, the aesthetic refinement, and also the quality of being handmade is a really salient factor for folk art and distinguishes it from industrial machinery. So we do use machines in the process, but the concept and the finishing is largely done by hand and conceived not as a way to make something by machine, but to make something that we put our essential care into. And I would say that there's an aspect of humility in folk art, that an individual who makes an object for use in life is not putting himself forward, saying, I made this, this is my work, and I'm proud of it, and I'm going to stand behind it. We've been given a principle here of working anonymously and signing work with the guild's name. And that has been an interesting condition for us, one that puts us face to face with this question of pride and ownership and where does the piece originate. And it's a prompt to examine that we are a piece in a chain. We are a link that, if in my case, in wood, I didn't plant the tree that I'm working with. I didn't live with it all the time. I maybe was lucky enough to find it when it was knocked down, and then had a place in making something that preserves the work and could be useful and enter someone else's kitchen perhaps, or dining table. And so I'm just one of the links in the chain in the life of the tree, and maybe a helpful one. So that aspect of humility, I think, is a real quality of folk art. In the woodshop here at the Guild, functional work is really front and center. We make a lot of vessels that are mainly meant to serve food, salad bowls, for example. We make cutting boards. We make ware for serving at the table. And every once in a while we branch out and make something for the garden, like a dibble or something to scratch your back. But mainly it is ware for the kitchen. And I'll tell a story about where some of the wood has come from recently. When you go from here down to Canandaigua Lake, one of the routes is to turn on South Pine Valley Road, the very first way that you can get to the lake. And right along the right side, there were 3 really large white oak trees. And the town, the highway department, knocked 2 of them down, 2 of the 3, in the last month. And Bridget noticed that they were down and gave me the tip. And so I went down and looked at them with my helper and contacted the highway superintendent. And he had already picked them up and moved them into a dump that I hadn't known about further down South Pine Valley Road on Newell Road. And the 2 trees of the 3 that were knocked down were in the dump sideways. And so we planned our attack on how to harvest slabs from the trees. And I have some wonderful video of my helper, Alex Regas, with this chainsaw bar that's that long, digging slabs out of the tree that was on top. There's one lying down and another one leaning on top of it. So he really skillfully, surgically removed slabs that were about this wide and maybe 3-4 inches thick. And we loaded them in a pickup truck and brought them back. And I've been working on making vessels out of the slabs that need to dry. And white oak is very challenging to dry because it wants to crack as soon as it meets the air. So all of these big wide platters and shallow bowls are stacked up inside a mountain of white oak chips that are protecting them from the air and hopefully letting them dry in a very measured way so that they don't get too dry too fast and come apart. And when I see that they are starting to crack, I back them out of the stack and can put a coating on them so that they're further slowed down in the ground. I know there's a lot to say in our group, so I'm going to just finish by saying that, like Bridget, in finding the white oak, I would like to invite any of you to let me know when you see trees knocked down on the side of the road or in the yard. And one of our main scouts is sitting here in Canandaigua. Canandaigua has some beautiful trees, and Helen gives me a shout whenever she sees a tree come down and says, "Hey, get over here! Bring the truck! They're cutting down the oak on Main Street." So I listen and I respond, and I've gotten some wonderful things that Helen has put me off about. And I have been working with Albany and working with St. Peter so that there's an opportunity for the woodshop to get you a special easy pass to heaven if you want to become a woodshop staff. Yes, Bill.
So let's not leave out the toys. I think, if anything, the toys are really, right from the beginning, are really good examples of what the world would consider folk art.
Yes, yes. And folk art, the toys have been a wonderful education for me personally, because starting out in the woodshop about 50 years ago, I was told to make toys. And it was really challenging because I didn't have any background in wood. And I had to lean on the expertise of others and just by hook or crook figure out how to do things. And there was a lot of good counsel, good help from the others in the workshop. And I was given a project that I needed to get other craftspeople together to work on making a jack in the box. And that was a great education. And so the folk art aspect of toys is really recognition. Thank you. There'll be time for questions and more at the end. So that and pass it on to my team.
And been involved with what we originally called sewing studio shop. It was one of the first ones at the Guild, and you can think of sewing as one of the original folk arts. It used to be thought of as an art. I'm sure it was just a domestic craft that needed to be done for thousands of years, really. But here at the Folk Art Guild, that studio evolved over the time, and at some point, maybe 10 years ago or so, started saying, hey, can we make other things that don't necessarily always require sewing, but they do have to do with fiber. And we've always worked, made a point of working with natural fibers, but what we might begin to dive on or otherwise manipulate fibers for the different work styles, and make products like a handbag or wall hanging, scarf, a table runner, things that weren't strictly sewn clothing. So we kind of modified the name of the studio to natural fiber designs. As I said, I actually have been involved in the studio about the last 20 years. And so I was involved with it 40 years ago for a while too. And then left to work in a different craft area of glass making. Originally, talking 40 years ago, or maybe a little more, the studio was housed in a different location. It was in the house, in a room that's about 12 by 15 or something like that. And as many as 6 people were working in there, sewing machines and cutting out fabrics and doing projects together. And I think one of the aspects of what makes what we do folk art is that almost you could say like it's a guild system, or a cricket system. There's the master craftsperson. In this case, it was a woman named Jane Griffiths, who was one of the first members of the Folk Art Guild. And she would oversee the projects and kind of make most of the decisions, I would say, about how things were going to be done. And then there were graduated levels of experience within the shop of people who maybe they could work on one whole object, say a man's shirt that was designed there according to the rally folk style. And then there were people like me who was just really new. And even though I was 30 years old and had been sewing for myself and my family already for, I don't know, 15 years or something, what I got to do was stitch by hand a hem in a shirt that someone else had made. And that instruction and that demand for the attention to stitching that hem, stitch by stitch in a certain pattern, hidden stitch, not just in the old whipping it along type of thing. It really needed to be done a certain way. And that way of working and learning and setting up a situation that allowed me to have the kind of attention to working I've never experienced before. Even though, yeah, I know how to thread and needle and work the sewing machine and cut some cloth out and whatever. But that whole aspect of working together, it just would bring up the possibility of all kinds of self-questions. How do I feel about this? Does it matter? And what if I work for a half hour on stitching this hem in, and then I show it to Jane, and she said, no, this is, you get it differently here or whatever, and you get up and see what you need. And we work on it a little more. That is something that, I'm not sure that all producers of folk art do it that way, but that's something very specific and very special to this place and this method. I think, I've had so many thoughts about this question, and going to the way that the studio has developed within the last 10 or 20 years, I would say that we've made a lot of efforts toward producing a sustainable product, and we've done it in different ways. And I think some of the ways we do involve using methods that are based in folk art or picture. So I have some, a few notes here to help me. As I mentioned, we've always used natural fibers, and some unique ones. First of all, you think about the cellulose and the protein fibers, like cotton and linen fibers from plants, and then so-called protein fibers that are from animals, wool, of different types, and different types of woodworking products, I guess. And silk is in that category too. So that's a wide range of possibilities, and we try to be experimental sometimes, or at least open to something different, and use things like soy fiber from soybeans, hemp, and chemicals from the plant. There's a brand name called Pincel, some people may have heard of, and that is actually made from eucalyptus fiber, stems of eucalyptus plants. And then, of course, from flax. At one point, we found bamboo fiber, and we thought, this is great. While working with it, it could dye well, and people liked it. And then, in looking into its production, we found that it was made by one company in one area in China, and the production method was secret. And what we could find out about it was that there was a high level of chemicals used in the conversion of that bamboo stem fiber to this fabric. So we really decided that that really did not fit our ethic for what we wanted to be doing. You mentioned dyeing. We used either low impact ocean dyes or natural dyes from plants. The designs that we chose, and I think this has a lot to do with folk style of folk art. We often, and most often, have chosen designs that are low waste, and try to use every part of this piece of fabric that we have, and not have a lot of waste parts of it not used. So this leads us to use fairly square type designs, and I've got a couple of things to show this. Not only the shape of the garment or the object, but also the of using up what is left. That's called the offcuts. Yeah. Here's an example. This is, we call this a tunic. It's really square, and it has an opening for the arms and panel down the side. Pulling together, and get a vent here to ease it there. This was designed or decided upon very early. This is a really early. We have many books with us sometimes when gosh, that was a rusty paper diagram years ago. Somebody sketched it out, documenting his life, and sometimes it's from the archives. We did that. And this particular thing shows some other interesting aspects. We try to, or we're open to using fabrics from other cultures around the world. So this particular fabric, I acquired it online and sold it on Etsy, and they had bought it in factory model. It's made maybe in the 80s, say. It's one wide piece of fabric, but it had been woven in strips. And this is must have friend who was a weaver, and she said, probably a backstrap, something like that. A strip is this wide, and they would weave these long strips and then stitch them together by hand. So to see this hand stitching, someone did 4 years ago. The fabric is completely used for something else. Before I bought it, that seller bought it. It was also dyed, indigo dyed, and then method called shibari. It's a resist dye. If something is put on it, and it resists the dye, and then that is taken off. Maybe a rust or something like that. Then, when I started putting it together, I said, okay, it has some fragile places on it. So we do a little bit of usable mending. And the mending was done in the style of Japan, called a sashiko type stitch. It's straight stitch. And some of this is fabric from Japan as well, also vintage. And borrowing beautiful art, both art from other cultures. And I think that's really important to recognize. Just an example of that whole idea. This is piecework, small pieces that were left from other projects. I thought has a lot of fabric from music, sewing, things. And on this one, you can see again, this is something that was dyed here in this chipboard style. Smaller faded pieces from Indonesia, we acquired from somewhere in small pieces. It's use what we have, that's another thing. And so we really concentrate. This is over the head, we might call it sort of a poncho-like thing. It's made from pieces
that were cut off and we cut out the shirt that we did cut. So we cut out the shirt as economically as possible, lay it out on the cloth, and then we have those small pieces left. So we do put the pieces together and make something else, make a whole. Since I'm talking too long. Is there anything left? Such years. I took your notes.
Pretty good. Let's hope I can do as well.
So, I don't know, I'm fascinated by this question of what makes it folk art or what is folk art. One thing I could say is this little anecdote that came to my mind. My father was born in 1925 and he lived 100 years. He passed last year. He was an optician for his career. When he retired in the early 80s, he decided he would take up oil painting. And then he was always singing. Always had some different stuff. He never had singing before. They were really good. But he took it up and did big paintings and big sketches and stuff too. And he said, "Hey, I read that Grandma Moses took up painting when she was, later on in the years, and she is called a folk artist. And so I wonder if I could market my paintings as Grandpa living." Because this must be folk art. And this, so it does have the aspects of being self-taught and coming out of lived experience and that sort of thing. So took his work to the local art school and asked an expert what they thought about this. Could I be the next one? And is this folk art? And the person said, no way is this folk art. You can't do it because you use things and you painting stuff perspective. I almost walking into the show. Decided against it. But you use perspective and you show shadows and figures. And he doesn't think so. He doesn't use to watch Bob Ross. And so he didn't ever try it. But he didn't place. And I thought about bringing the paintings to it, doesn't mean, it's like have to be flat. It's human symbol. And use perspective. I think by virtue of the system that we use here, like every experience teaching others, and the care and attention to others, and being aware that other moral familiar touches and different better.
So for those of you who are not familiar with the guild, the craftspeople here include both residents the non-residents, resident members. So it's interesting that in the fiber section, that the two main craftspeople in natural fiber work and the main weaver are non-residents, even though they've been members of the guild for 50 years, 45 years, whatever. So just so people understand, the Folk Art Guild is a larger community of people than beyond the resident group.
Well, after those two very stern and informative presentations, I'm a little hesitant to say anything, but I'll do my best. I've been working, maybe passing around these scraps of handmade papers. Oftentimes, we think of paper as something we just look at, unless it's like something like that. Take a few moments to feel the texture of some of the papers. Handmade papers, they're extraordinary, and they're certainly relevant. I first came here in '74, being drawn to the lifestyle of vegetable gardening. And in the fall, there was question, well, what is my going to do? And as was often the custom in those days, you found yourself in situations that you had never envisioned. So there needed to be someone to be trained in print. And I had no great interest in that, but there was a big need, and he said, we'll try it out. So I did that, and I was working with many artists, many trained and many not trained. Primarily over the years, more on daily, consuming community knowledge, but it was very, very influential, not only in the department, but also in my education. So I was being trained to mechanically run a very complex offset press. And I was neither especially mechanically oriented, nor really cared that much about what I was doing. And in the environment of those days that obviously David had referred to, the stress on attention, point of care, and even by then, in '74, bear in mind the Guild was in 1967, after that short time, it was a very well-established expectation, not only among us ourselves, but also the public that can and purchase our things, of absolute perfection. And that was very important in running a press and printing numbers of things. The cards and books that the shop produced to sell, and also a large range of promotional materials, posters, flyers, invitations, which in the pre-electronic era was needed to visit. Each one of the designs, the cards and books, as well as the promotional materials, was guided very carefully by Mrs. Marsh, who had a very strong influence in that department. And she was a trained art historian and had run the photographic, the earliest photography galleries in the city. And she was very, very well educated in a broad sense. And this is where the folk art streams came in. She knew how to convey to people who were designing, but to them a question, a search, and we would all be part of that process. It wasn't just comparing the particular artist. She brought us all in, and we looked, and she had her views, but she was also very interested in the process, in the development of a design, of the choice of a color, of the arrangement of something on a page, from the standpoint of Well, you could say it's search, but that's a poor word for what she was bringing. It was an investigation about possibilities. And along with the design, the color, what was going to happen on the page, was always the pointing at oneself in terms of why did I do this? What's the impression that I want to make? And who is this that's putting this forward? Is this something that has any universality? Maybe that's the way to put it. And it didn't mean that everything that was produced had universality. But it didn't mean necessarily that everything was produced she was necessarily satisfied with, nor me as well. But there was a continuing thread in that search, in that investigation of exploration. What is this for? What is your intention? What would you like the impression to be that this is going to have? And along with that came the very practical, if you will, application of that to my machine. Again, it's not supplying to me. But I felt in service to something. A lot is going into these designs and these products and these promotion materials. And okay, I have to bring my best to reproducing what I've been doing. And working with an artist to make sure that it's what ultimately they say, yes, let's do it this way. The aspect of that was a foreign language to me. I had no education in art. I never even thought about it, really, to tell you the truth. But I heard them talk about colors. And I heard them talk about designs and posting things on the page and how an illustration for a children's book is put together. And it was like a foreign language. I thought, well, these people are onto something that we're curious about. And so that was intimidating and actually humbling at the same time, because I came in a lot of background in style music and thought myself quite intelligent and able to understand music better than anybody in front of me. And this was another way. So that was in the picture, and the education that I received from those people, as well as these knowledge, was quite profound. In the 90s, the decision was made not to upgrade the offset printing process to digital, which was the industry standard, becoming the industry standard. And so the question became, well, how are new things going to be generated? And this was after Mrs. March passed away. And I remember one of the earliest things was a sale poster. We didn't really have anyone to do it, nor anyone to active at that point. Neither did anyone else really exhibit an interest or have very much skill in creating a poster. So we had these pictures in the dining room. Mrs. March had done in the last several years ago a lot of dry colored pictures. And it was fall. So I looked around at some babies. There was a color Xerox machine at the place where I worked, about in the contract. And I put together a transparent overlay of text and laid some leaves on a piece of paper and had a cross on the picture. And it was my first daring, I guess you could say, exploration of something outside the box that I hadn't seen in a year. But there was an opening. There was a vacancy. Yes, you could have put the straightforward text and color and, hold on. But I wanted to see what would be possible. And then that began to take off a bit in terms of cards. After looking at her pictures every day, three times a day, and having impressions of the way she worked with those dry flowers and leaves. And having an interest in working with these papers and skill set maybe help early on. That, of course, you did not go into the class. You did this one of 5,000 questions now, excuse me. And by the time you realize something is off, you have gone through the entire line of the papers. So that was not something that I had any intention of doing, but one of the kind that allowed me to risk, allowed me to explore something. And they were not only the handmade papers, but the foundational papers of the cards themselves were gift papers from Baseboard. Some of you may remember that large printing company in Rochester, who gave us a lot of papers. And so it allowed me freedom to explore that way. It also allowed me a way to invite people who were sometimes passing through or not to come up and really sort of play. And say, well, I don't want to mess anything except strike bounds. It's gift paper. And if you don't like it, just throw the nice stuff out. Which is a great sort of declaration of independence as opposed to having a precise design that had to represent the build that's going to be repeatedly reproduced. High status, if you will. And that really appealed to me, a lot of permeability, which is still up there. My partner, Bonnie Sexton, helps do that. And she's much more critical of her work than I am, so she has a little bit of an attitude about the market. And I'd also like to acknowledge Peter Dillon, who's made big contributions in there is big contributions, you'll see them in the gallery, for new books that the department produced. Basically, he produced them that the department published. I don't want to take up too much time, but the question of folk art. The anonymity was a big deal to me when I first came here because I thought, you know someone did this, right? You know someone, and I knew. So we were working together on this deal. But what entered as the anonymity part was the number of people involved in the design process, and also the number of people involved in the production process, what I mentioned in the design department. I just did, there was bookbinding, there was, of course, the marketing of the sales, which someone else started there. There was the process of transforming these raw materials, the idea, search for a right design that really fit the bill. And that definition is always and the actual embodying of all of that. And it took a lot of people to pull that off. Even more than just me printing, a lot of printing other people did too. So it was more the anonymity came in my particular mind with the number of people involved in the process. I couldn't say this was my work, this was not that. Neither could be for the artist and the author who had. So,
Hi. My name is Silverstein, and I'm a resident here and work in pottery and also in the fiber sphere. I'll talk a little bit about my perspective on folk art, like these other people have. And I also wanted to take a minute to share a current artist statement. And that is something I've been writing recently, talks about my work, something I kind of reassess every now and then when I have to submit kind of application that asks for an artist statement. So that'll be just a little bit about my work, which you can see in the gallery, you can see a note here, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to talk about what I do here at Rochester Folk Art Guild. I'm a new member of this organization, a new person who works in the studio, so I did not have the same sort of introduction to working in crafts as many people did here at the Guild. Like David elaborated on that, and it's really special circumstances that were present through the Guild history, especially led by research. I had a fairly academic training in art and included a lot of art history study. I went to Syracuse University to study in ceramics and got my BFA there. And I spent a year and a half at Brown University in a graduate program. But without that first-hand exposure to some of these ideas that Mrs. Marsh was bringing, the art history context, for me, sort of shed some light on the way that is called the folk art has a relation to the word art for me, and then it just has this qualifier, folk art. And what that really does and did was separate it in a way from this larger umbrella term of art, and was often used to talk about the works that were being made by people outside of the Eurocentric art world that was very much inside of institutions and schools and galleries. So it did kind of exclude it in a way, but I think the term also has a strength in that it highlights qualities in this type of work that can be really learned from and respected. I always think of Walter Gropius in the 1920s really celebrated what was considered folk art in his teachings at the Bauhaus in Germany, and his ideas were to really blur the line between this high, fine art based in ideas and theory, and really open it to the world of craft and craftsmanship and utility, and see that blended can add so much to the depth of an object, seeing that there's this bigger picture that surrounds the thing being made, that involves their makers, the materials, its life after it's made, its utility in the future. So to me, when I think about these qualities that highlighted when thinking about folk art, I see two strong points. The first is that the hand is really present in the work. The person who made it is present in the work in some way, whether that is shown as evidence in the handling of the material, or an energy or a gesture that's captured in the material. All these things really give it a vitality that you can connect to when you're looking at the piece as a human being. The other aspect of folk art that I think is highlighted by naming it is the presence of a place where it's made. Again, tying it to the people and to the materials, that sort of locates it and gives it a context. And often, when successful, a piece can show that, and someone can continue that connection, seeing the place through the piece. These are both things I really strive for in the work that I do here, especially I'll talk about my work in pottery and specifically about making these clay figurines, which a lot of you have seen. They're often very popular view and show people and animals and it's what the artist statement that I've been working on is really about. So I'll just read through that. With my hands and a clay scoring tool, I encourage slabs, coils, and balls of clay into small representations of life I see around me. I illustrate scenes of people and animals inspired by the forms the bodies take, capturing attitudes and energies in different postures, working, playing, laying about, praying, in celebration, in aggravation, in urgent or tired, toiling ways. A unique character in each figurine is awoken in its earthen material. We see our own likeness in the clay figurine and are able to connect with deep parts of ourselves. In the process of making, the figurines are animated by the tension of their material in my hand that is forming them, sometimes cracking, texture, leaning into, or resisting. I simplify shapes and details to work in a way that encourages energetic, direct gestures of the hand, and not fussings. I'm giving just what is needed at each phase, and not more. I am a shepherd. When working with clay, I prioritize the evidence of this vital relationship, which is physically dignified in the material through its transformation from clay to ceramic. So that was the product of a good exercise and really asking myself these questions. What am I doing in the studio? What is it doing after we've taken part in this process? And I hope people will see some of my work now in the future and thanks for listening.
So Bridget stepped out, but if anyone has anything to add,
Please, your turn. This is a truce, a wonderful weaver.
I've also been interested in craft and crafts and folk art. I sort of always thought of it as like things that were produced in Appalachia, where it was very raw and they made things. And also as a component, an ancestral component, things are passed down, and techniques are passed down, materials are passed down, recipes are passed down. And especially with folk music, in Appalachia, that goes back to the 16th and 17th centuries, some of that music and music speaking on it. And so it's another thoughts about it. So.
If I may, so being a professional craftsperson in the world for 35 years, and going to craft shows, jury craft shows at 1,200 exhibitors, and all the traditional media, and looking at this work, and sometimes having this thought in mind. So the question is, when does the work aesthetic actually more than mass production become something that the world would consider to be forward? So, in the glass shop, for example, if you've seen the show at the library, so there's one piece there, and the piece is there, and there's a picture of it in the book. And the book shows all the pieces. It was a major international jury glass show in 1979 that toured major museums in Europe and everything. And other quantities and everything. So of those pieces, I would actually say that that piece could be considered focused. because the techniques that they use is just very super straightforward and in a way naive. Whereas other pieces there, like the Elizabeth Cage stone, personally I wouldn't consider to be folk. And so, like even the music production that you're talking about, so one could say that when the print shop went from silk screening to the Heidelberg press, that it was no longer folk. And personally, I would say that the cards, the traditional cards that we continue to make, that originated in silk screening and made, say, the press, were still folk because the aesthetic was still that naive and that naive quality to it. So yeah, anyway, this is finish up. So Claudia, when you were talking about your father's work and this woman sitting awesome focus. So the word naive is the word that comes up for me. So when you start doing the spectrum, you start doing shadow, and all those more advanced quotes, advanced things. The naivety of, say, Grandma Moses was left behind. So to me, it seems like there's a huge gray area between things that like the world would consider and we would consider for people, and then things where the aesthetic and even the techniques have become so sophisticated. Well, it's all relevant. The world would no longer consider it. So for me as well, it's an ongoing question.
I'm trying to consider, we had a department for imports, and this is where we find things and offer them to the public. And then there's almost a lacquered box, I think it was Polish, and it was a gloss, a very finely made box. And then on the lid, there was a composition of wheat straw cut and arranged in a pattern. And it was not naive, it was not primitive, it was very refined as a design. I would consider that folk art for the method that was used and the use of materials and the sense of place that Emma was referring to. It evoked, the feel that the meat came from. And the handwork of the maker with his razor cutting the edges. So it is a relative term.
I think it's applying to the world of fashion. Well, my opinion is there's a dividing line between the kinds of things that we carefully make and the world of pure fashion, or something that you might see on spring or fall runway shows. I think it's clear that those, those folk art. It has to do with the intention of the maker. It's more akin to the fine art people as well.
Maybe there's also more dresses is maybe going to be around or very limited production.
But also,
Something that is useful and simple is often
So a couple of you, I talked a little about tension and fear, and I just wondered, why is that important? Why was that important to you? And one was seeing that there was a basis of something.
What would you say? And what
Well, I'm not, I'm interested in what, why intention, why fear? Why is that important? Why is that? Well, I mean, I was hoping that maybe somebody who was quite in the answer.
Since that's all I was really working with, I didn't want to design study. Maybe only was the only thing I could hang on to in the midst of this noisy machine. And then I was not good at it. And yet I wanted to be here, I wanted to do stuff. And it sort of after a while made sense. Okay, no one's around, I can do stuff. The result will come out. But just an ordinary standpoint, like that, this machine, I could waste hundreds of dollars in paper by not doing time. But beyond that, once I got to some skill, it was like, what's in this for me? It wasn't for me. What's in it for me? And because of the environment, because of the study of the application of the work of you, who's knowledge and others, and we were very fortunate to have. There was a consistent, clear emphasis. I would say unmistakably. And after a while, if you weren't interested in it, you just said, this isn't for me. It was that strong. And it's just me.
Because it's not an entitled but I think that, as I heard, I'm not saying the hand of the maker is seeing or experienced and to have a meaning turning out in the product that is carefully produced. It's a good thing. Rather than something quickly standing in a sweatshop. Something.
If there's one more question, we could take it. Well, thank you so much, folks. This is wonderful. Yeah. Appreciate it. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I hope you can come back to another talk. Thank you so much.